Hello and welcome again to Front Seat to Climate Change. I'm your host, Dawar Butt. Today we're talking about something that arrives without warning. We're talking about flash floods, especially in the context of the torrential rains that have hit Pakistan. Torrential rains often come without little warning, especially for communities which are not well prepared, but at the same time can bring about extreme rainfall in a short period of time, leading to flash flooding. They're sudden, they're deadly, and they're becoming more and more frequent around the world, from Canadian towns to cities of Pakistan. Urban flooding as well as riverine flooding, such as in Swat and other valleys. So, what's behind this surge? Why are communities reeling in the aftermath rather than being informed in advance? And how can we protect the vulnerable communities? But before we bring in our guests to speak in more detail on the matter, here's an explainer from my colleague Muzira.
For decades, the Swat River was a lifeline for communities nestled in Pakistan's mountainous north. Its clear waters not only sustained farms, fisheries, and tourism, but also offered a place of calm and recreation for local families. Yet beneath its surface, another story has been unfolding. One that has turned the once pristine river into a symbol of unchecked resource extraction. Gravel and sand from the Swat River are highly sought after for construction projects. The river's location, flowing through rugged mountains, makes it rich in these materials. Mining these resources is legal under regulated leases, which are meant to protect the river's natural course and surrounding ecosystem. Under the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa River Protection Act 2017 and the Mining of Minor Minerals from Riverbed Rules 2022, mining contractors are required to follow clear rules. They must not divert the natural course of the river, obstruct its flow, or dig deeper than a set limit. Specific blocks along the river are leased out through auctions with checks meant to ensure compliance. In practice, however, this regulation is often ignored. The extraction process involves digging deep trenches, far deeper than allowed, directly into the riverbed. These artificial pits fill with water and trap sand and gravel, which are then collected and sold at higher prices to feed the booming construction industry. The result is a river that no longer flows as it once did. Its natural course has been repeatedly diverted to make mining easier. Protective dikes built to redirect the water can collapse under pressure from rain and flash floods, rapidly rising water levels without warning. Where the river once had a clear, predictable channel, it now hides sudden drop-offs and deep pits. On the surface, the water may look calm and shallow, but underneath, these hidden ditches pose a deadly risk. Despite rules that limit how deep miners can dig and how close they can operate to riverbanks, entire stretches of the riverbed have been carved up, leaving behind an unstable and unpredictable waterway. This unrestrained mining has not only endangered human lives, but also the broader environment. Fish species native to these waters are vanishing, trees along the banks have been cleared to make way for heavy machinery, soil erosion is worsening, agricultural fields downstream are losing fertility, and floods are becoming more destructive. While mining the river's gravel and sand may boost local economies in the short term, its long-term impact is proving to be devastating. And yet, the practice continues, often beyond officially approved zones, with fines and crackdowns doing little to stop it altogether. Unchecked riverbed mining is transforming a once thriving ecosystem into a landscape of hidden hazards and lost livelihoods. The Swat River, once a symbol of life for the valley, now stands as a stark reminder that when nature's limits and the laws designed to protect it are ignored, the consequences flow far beyond what the human eye can see.
That was my colleague Muzira explaining how unregulated sand and gravel mining in River Swat actually made these conditions that were conducive to flash flooding, or at least leading the river streams in the direction of populated areas, changing the river's natural course and making it more dangerous during high flows. This monsoon season alone, flash floods in Pakistan have already killed at least 72 people. In Swat Valley and Gilgit-Baltistan, glacial floods swept away roads, homes, and families. In Lahore, stagnant floodwaters mixed with sewage, creating a second crisis of disease and displacement. Pakistan is not alone. Around the world, from Germany to Canada, flash floods are becoming more frequent, more intense, and more destructive. Even in places once considered safe. We head into the mountains of northern Pakistan, where rising temperatures are turning glaciers into ticking time bombs. In Pakistan's north, the climate crisis is unfolding in ice. Temperatures are rising faster than global average, and the glaciers are melting faster too. Joining us is Farhan Ahmed Khan, Regional Manager for South Investigation, Country Director for CESVI Pakistan. Farhan, thank you for being here. Let's start with what you're seeing on the ground. How have glacial outburst floods or GLOFs impacted communities in Swat, Pakistan, and Chitral?
Okay, so thank you so much. And I think here first we have to understand what is GLOF. Basically, GLOF is glacier lake outburst flooding. It's a natural phenomena that happens anywhere in the world where there are glaciers. However, the recent rise in the temperature and the global warming is a main cause which is creating a lot of problems uh, in the natural ecosystem. So the gloves are happening more often and with extreme intensity as this has never happened in the past. So if you see Pakistan, we have a big mountain region in our north, specifically in Chitral, Swat, Gilgit-Baltistan, Hunza, and whole Karakoram Hindu Kush range. Now, these gloves, which are now coming very often, are creating multiple problems for the communities, for the infrastructure, for the agriculture, which is the main pillar of our economy, and for tourism as well, both local and international. So what happened when the temperature rise and there is a glacier that melts down much more frequently and with much more intensity than it should be, there is a whole, full of debris and water that came down very rapidly without giving enough time to the community to manage their evacuation or to save their crops or to save their infrastructure, even their houses. And once this gulf came down very high altitude to the low altitude, there are debris inside. It has a furious amount of energy in it. And then whatever comes in the ways, it destroys it. And I think we have seen recent examples. For example, I think the whole nation has seen the recent incident of a whole family from Sialkot. They died in this unfortunate incident of River Savar. But back of that flooding was again a globe that initiated from high in the mountain and then created this flooding in the river Indus. So I think it's creating a lot of problems for the community, our mountain community, the overall infrastructure, the economy, the tourism, and of course, as I said, agriculture, which is the main pillar of our economy.
And what's really driving this change? How have temperatures in the north mountainous regions, how is this accelerating the glacial melt?
Okay, so here we have to go and see the data, and since I am a practitioner, who is working in this sector for last 15 years, I do consult data very often. And the recent data that is available openly is really alarming. For example, if you see the data, the average temperature rise in Hindu Kush region, which is mainly in Pakistan, is 1.5 times faster than the average temperature rise in the rest of the world. This should be the other way around because there are glaciers, there is ice. It is called roof of the world. We have lots of water there, very precious water, which needs to be melted down in a natural process. But unfortunately, because of this 1.5 times faster melting of the glacier, they're melting quite fast, which creates a lot of problem. And if you see the recent example, in 2022, in our northern areas, we have seen some unprecedented temperatures. For example, it is on record, GB witnessed 43, Gilgit-Baltistan witnessed 43 degrees centigrade, which is unprecedented. Chitral, 46, Chilas, 48.5. This is really alarming for us. And a recent research done by a very famous institute that works on weather patterns and climate change, it's called ICI MOD. They suggested that if this trend remains there for another couple of decades, so as shorter of the period as 20 years, uh, we will have to lose our 50% of the glaciers in these areas. This is really a moment of big worries for all of us. It's alarming because we do not have such water management system. We do not have such, uh, let's say, drainage system. We do not have some such infrastructure that managed to absorb such amount of debris and water came down all the way from the Himalayas in the Hindu Kush to the sea. So definitely what comes in their way, what comes in the way of that water will get damaged. So again, it's alarming. It's of course there is a global warming, which is a phenomena we witnessed for last 20 years or so. But for our northern part, it is as important as anything. I mean, we really have to think as a nation. There is a strong need of national discourse. There is a strong need of collective efforts to be able to contribute in this overall phenomena in a positive way. For example, deforestation or forestation is a proven remedy, let's say. It is a proven mechanism to cool down temperature up to certain degree. Responsible tourism, uh, infrastructure that incorporate and integrate disaster risk reduction elements. And of course, responsible industrialization, because it's just not the temperature. We all are contributing. The people who are living in metropolitans and like Islamabad, Karachi, Lahore, they are contributing. So we have to take our responsibility. Otherwise, this is going to be a very dangerous scenario for the upcoming generations.
So, what role does changing monsoon and precipitation patterns play in triggering droughts in Pakistan?
Okay, so here we have to understand that when temperature rise, the ice melts. Okay, and this melting creates water streams that ultimately come into the rivers and then pass through Indus basin and goes to the Arabian Sea. Now, when we have abnormal rain patterns and abnormal monsoon season, so what is happening in this decade, that more rain fall in less period of time. Normally, we have a monsoon season in the past that start in June, July, goes until August. Okay, so there are 2, 3 months of normal monsoons, and there are multiple rainfalls, and that somehow was manageable because of course the land absorbed the water. The infrastructure that we have, of course, there are gaps and there are limitations that can absorb that, but with uh, very intense rainfall in a quick span of time, in a few number of days, uh, brings more water. When this more water added into the water that is coming from the glaciers as a normal melting of the ice in the summer seasons, when these two forces combine, that become disaster, that become flooding, that become flash flooding, that become gloughs, and you do not have time because so far, even with the modern technology, it is very hard to predict a glough. More importantly, it is very hard to predict the intensity of glow and how much water and debris will it bring. So this is something. And let me tell you one more thing. If you see the glaciers of Pakistan 30, 40 years back, they look more whitish from from a human eye or in the pictures. But now, if you go to these glaciers in the north, or if you see the recent clips or photographs of these glaciers, they look more blackish, So there is a black part. It's not that they are melt and the stones are coming out of the mountain. No, basically, this phenomena is called black carbon effects. So what is black carbon effect? When we have wildfires, small tiny particles of carbon, they fly and they go and settle down into the ice. Similarly, because of the pollution, irresponsible industrialization, there is a lot of carbon that goes and then this is deposited on these glaciers. Basically, black color absorb, we all know. So there is more absorption of heat and sunlight into the snow, which increases the melting of the ice. And then it's created a lot of, again, as I say, unprecedented water coming down to our systems, our basins, our rivers and canals, down into the Seine until, and that we cannot manage.
Communities already at risk are being exposed to even more danger by development. How are infrastructure projects like roads, hydropower plants, tourism resorts affecting risk of loss?
Here we have to basically, we have to respect the ecosystem, we have to respect the Mother Nature, and we have to follow some regulations. I visited United States. There is a valley called Jackson Hole. What the local government of the Jackson Hole did, they preserved 97% of the valley as natural resource. So you cannot construct more than 3% in the whole valley. It's a wonderful example of limiting the construction and preserving the ecosystem and the nature. Unfortunately, in our country, there is no such enforcement of these regulations. I believe there are regulations, but then the enforcement is a question mark. And because we do not have such enforcements of the regulation, and you can construct a big hotel inside a lake, which can be a big problem. So incident like what happened with Lexus Hotel happens, and it will happen with more frequency and with more intensity in the future if we do not follow or we do not respect the ecosystem. If human should not, if human do not respect the ecosystem. So I believe having a good tourism facility is important, but to have this facility uh, you know, planned and constructed in a place that taking into account Mother Nature, water pattern, and disasters is important. So I believe, and also all the infrastructure, not just this one resort, bridges, roads. We need to reinforce them. We need to incorporate disaster risk reduction principles into our construction and to our infrastructures. Otherwise, we build, and since we are not really respecting the Mother Nature as a nation, disasters come as a result of flooding, glaciers, melt, outburst flooding or avalanche, or heavy snow, and these infrastructure and these investments get damaged.
When floods strike, timing is everything. Does Pakistan have an effective early warning system in place for floods? And what are the challenges in monitoring so many glacial lakes in remote regions?
I would say that Pakistan make progress in general. Especially in last 20 years, we make progress, but to have a robust early warning system with the technology, even AI integrated, is something we have not yet achieved. But we are on that path. And I know there are multiple projects contributing. For example, this famous GLOF project of the government of Pakistan and United Nations Development Program (UNDP) is an example of a wonderful initiative, a community-driven initiative which is helping communities and as a whole contributing positively in the overall, overall scenario. The recent establishment of National Emergency Operations Center in Islamabad by NDMA is a very good example. It's a state-of-the-art, world-class emergency operations center. I think it's an amazing initiative. Similarly, modernization of Pakistan Met Department. So we are making progress, but of course, it's limited with gap, and we still have to go far. And again, as I said in the previous question, that predicting the intensity of the globe and correctly the glove timing and how much debris and water it will bring, it's still very, very difficult task. So a country like Pakistan need to again invest a lot. And of course, I would say that it's an international responsibility for the international community as well. Because as you know, and this has been said millions of times in the recent years, that Pakistan is a victim because we contribute less than 1% in the overall carbon emission globally. And we are one of the 10 most affected countries by the climate change. And of course, those big nations, I would say G7, G8, G10, who are the main industrial countries, they are contributing a lot. So it's an international call. It's an international climate justice call. The government of Pakistan, along with the international community, needs to, come forward. And I would say, especially the international community needs to come forward and support in overall progress for early warning system mitigation, strong infrastructure, and CBDR, very important, community-based disaster risk management. It's very, very important. So yeah, I mean, again, collective effort. This is the word. We all have to, from all the section of the society, academia, civil society, judiciary, legislators, industrialists, corporate sector, government, media, very important media. We all have to come together on one page, first of all, to understand the issue, to realize our responsibility, and to work collectively to mitigate this. And then, we can still manage.
Despite the risks, there have been moments of success. Can you share examples of government-led or community-led interventions that have helped reduce risk?
So GLOF 1 and GLOF 2 project, these are projects, multi-year projects, which UNDP, United Nations Development Program, and Government of Pakistan implemented jointly, along with the GB Council and the government of KPK. And it's been almost 10 years. These projects are up and running in phase-wise approach. I think it's a wonderful example of community-driven CBDRM approach. So there are multiple layers in this project, starting from sensitization to awareness raising to CBDRM, which is again community-based disaster risk management, early warning system, planning, and then execution. So I believe there are some examples. So I would put the GLOF project as an important project, and I think what else we have to do, as I said before, we need to have DRR, disaster risk reduction approach in our infrastructures, more specifically in ours. So all the roads, bridges, are buildings that normally the government constructs. For example, the schools, colleges, universities, judicial complex, markets, tourism spots. We need to really take into account the principle of disaster risk reduction, because disaster happen, they will happen. We have to make sure that we are good enough to prepare enough to mitigate the impact of the disaster. And we have to understand that all disasters are not natural. We are the culprits, the humans, again, the humans of the whole world. So when we destroy the mother nature, when we destroy the ecosystem, when we do not respect the principles of nature, then nature take revenge, and these are through disasters.
Lastly, what could help us, especially these communities, build more resilience? What mitigation strategies can help reduce the threat of globs and flash flooding in Pakistan?
Okay, so again, it's not easy, again, as I said, because we are talking about a very huge area. We are talking about 7,000 plus glaciers and 3,050 plus glacial lakes which are vulnerable. Uh, I would again re-emphasize collective efforts, and why I am saying this again and again. Take the example of Netherlands. Netherlands is a country that is most vulnerable to flooding and sea level rising. But what they did is amazing. They have a amazing water management system, and it took them almost 50 years as a nation to come to that level. So again, it's a bumpy, difficult road, but we all have to learn to cruise through. And this can only be done when we all contribute our part. So community living in the mountain, they need to get trained how to manage such gloves or any other hydrometeorological disaster that is coming into their communities, their villages, and the whole mountain region. We people who live in big cities, we when we go to mountains, we really need to understand what are our responsibilities. It's very important. We cannot be just a tourist, go and destroy the overall ecosystem over there, and to contribute in the overall devastation. So that needs to be done. Media need to play its part. We need to basically again have rules and regulations which are enforced, and it cannot be enforced with force. It can be enforced only when we understand they are important, when we realize as a nation that they are important to protect, first of all, these beautiful mountains, the overall ecosystem there, and also the cities, because a big glow that happen in Sawat or Chitral or Upper Dil can be a problem in Hyderabad or Mirpur Khas, because all the water that came down from the mountains, ultimately it goes down to the Indus and then to the sea. But Indus has its own capacity, and what we are doing, we are going closer to the river. Our agriculture communities, they are going very close to the river, which is not a good practice, because rivers can change their path. There could be flooding, and it destroy their whole agriculture. So yeah, big word, collective efforts.
We take you halfway across the globe to Canada, where a different climate is driving very similar crisis. Canada might seem far removed from South Asia's monsoon floods, but it too is grappling with a new climate reality. Joining us now is Jason Thistlethwaite, who is expert on population and flood risk. Jason, thank you for joining us. Let's begin with the human toll. How have the recent floods in Canada forced families to abandon their homes? And what's been the scale of permanent displacement versus temporary evacuation?
So there's been a number of significant flood events in Canada. It is our most costly and common hazard. we've had significant events in 2017, 2019, 2021, and more recently 2024. Um, some populations are more displaced than others, particularly Canada's Indigenous communities. They are oftentimes evacuated and can spend some long durations, months, in one particular case from a flood about a decade ago, even years. But in terms of permanent displacement, our recovery time is anywhere between 6 months to about a year, depending on the severity of the flood. Uh, the biggest challenge in Canada, like most countries dealing with flooding as a major hazard, is we do have a lot of legacy development in high-risk areas or floodplains. People enjoy living near the water. Municipalities areas tends to be higher. Properties tend to have higher value, so therefore higher taxes. One thing that Canadian governments are prioritizing to treat using property buyouts. So in the most extreme circumstances, equivalent to some of the properties we saw in Texas last week that flooded, these are properties that would be considered in the floodway, not the floodplain. The floodway is where the water is deepest and with the highest velocity. That is effectively the riverbed. Canadian governments are offering people in those locations buyouts, offering to buy their homes in order to relocate them out of harm's way. This has become a much more popular strategy because governments have realized that they can't simply afford to keep rebuilding in these high-risk areas. So there's a series of different mechanisms, policies, and strategies to manage a flood risk in Canada. We do not have the same risk of flash flooding as we recently saw in a place like Texas due to different ground conditions and less population exposure. So there's a lot more people in areas around high risk areas in a place like Texas that we do in Canada. We certainly do have some high risk areas similar to those I imagine in Pakistan, where you've got people living in river valleys who during significant snow melts, particularly in the spring here, combined with some rain, you can get a sudden onset type of flooding. Normally, because those happen further upstream, we do have warning systems in place that will give people a heads up that that water is coming. And so in recent years, those types of flood events, we have been able to get people out of harm's way and have been fortunate not to suffer any casualties as a result.
Displacement leaves deep scars, not just physical ones. What patterns of internal migration are emerging in Canada due to these recurrent flash floods?
Right. So, this is one of the major lessons of disaster management globally. Across the globe, we've actually seen a significant decrease in the number of fatalities and casualties from natural disasters. We've improved significantly in our capacity to reduce those impacts from the 1970s, where we saw historic highs, to the last most significant casualty events from natural disasters are the 2004 tsunami and Japan tsunami in 2011. And those were significant events. But otherwise, in a place like Canada, our internal migration tends to be rather limited to the locations where people already are. And that's mainly because people have resources. They'll have a social network. They'll have people that they can go and visit or evacuate to, like family. In circumstances where they don't, we have disaster assistance, federal disaster assistance, and insurance. And that will help them rebuild in the event that they are hopefully not in a high risk area. We're trying to make policy changes to make that happen. So for the most part, we don't have that much internal migration. It tends to be rather limited to moving around the areas where people already are, and that's in large response to a robust disaster assistance set of policies, but also because yes. economic development here. People do have, Canada's an industrial country with a relatively robust GDP per capita. So this is a major lesson that we've kind of learned when it comes to disaster resilience globally, is that economic development is critical. Having people with their own means of recovery is going to be important. Governments just simply lack the state capacity, regardless of the level of the government you have, to help people recover. Some of these disasters are just completely overwhelming. So we really do need to build up economic development so that individuals have a capacity to able to withstand and recover. And in turn, what that does is when you build up that economic development, is then the state has more resources as well to put towards things like mitigation, mapping, hazard mapping that lets people know where high risk areas are, development requirements that limit where we're developing, limiting future development in high risk areas, emergency response and evacuation so that there are resources available. And that's something that many countries actually do quite well for the most part. So I think we're in a much better shape than we were 30 or 40 years ago. This is something that tends to get missed a little bit in some of the popular narratives. We're not perfect, and we still have plenty of work to do, but we're learning.
And this flooding obviously does not displace people. It also is permanently changing entire ways of life. How have flash floods disrupted traditional livelihoods, farming, fishing, tourism in vulnerable communities?
Yeah, we've done research on this that's confirmed that people who are more vulnerable, who have lower incomes, suffer disproportionately from natural disasters. Displacement is much more of a significant factor there. So in those situations, and I'll give you an example. So one of the challenges in Canada is that property prices are extremely high. We have a housing crisis here. So we have a large population right now that is renting. And when flooding occurs to those people and it damages their property, they have to move out. The landlord or the owner of the property might have insurance to cover that, but they've got to move. And in turn, when they start to look for another place to rent, because of the natural disaster, rental prices are extremely high in those areas because everyone is looking for another place to live. So that can have significant impacts. These people are unable to go to, say, the bank and get a line of credit that is able to pay for recovery. Those people do not have insurance. And so it is a significant impact. If they do own their property, or they are able to own some land, they have to basically self-finance that recovery. That can mean taking significant time off work in an agricultural or if you are more in one of those raw material sectors, it can have significant impacts because that's your livelihood. You're destroying the crops, you're destroying the real, the commodity that you're using as a part of your livelihood. So the impacts can be significant. We're talking about years of mental health impacts, a significant reliance on healthcare services. We're looking at higher levels of domestic disruptions, divorce rates, and worst case scenario, these people often end up moving away. They'll move away from where they are, looking for other work. And if that happens en masse, that can have a significant economic impact on that particular local community. So absolutely vulnerable people are, and equity-seeking populations in Canada are definitely more predisposed towards these types of risk, particularly Canada's Indigenous communities. They definitely have a higher exposure to these types of events. They are located in oftentimes remote areas. It is difficult to get resources out to some of these remote areas. But the fixes, the solutions, we know what they are. They're available with data, new technology. We're able to map risk to within a meter of where we think it is. And with that information, even communities with scarce resources can prioritize those towards the highest risk zones. Risk tends to be concentrated, meaning that a small proportion of property people generate the most damage. So in Canada, when it comes to flooding, people who live in the highest risk 1% generate annually about 40% of the damage. That's a significant amount of damage for a very small amount of people. So if we use data to be able to target those particular areas, we can identify solutions like building, in the case of flooding, berms and dikes, wildfire breaks. We can invest in property level defenses. The return on investment for using government capacity, resources, taxpayer dollars in those particular areas is very, very high. So I'm optimistic that once we know and we have an idea of where the risk is, you can actually target and prioritize resources to it and help protect these vulnerable populations.
Facing these threats, communities are adapting as well. How are local residents in flood-prone areas changing how they build homes or infrastructure to prepare for flash floods?
In most countries, most of the resources when it comes to disaster risk reduction go towards recovery. And that is an indication that you're treating the symptom and not the disease. The disease is the risk. The symptom are the consequences of that risk. But it's difficult. It is very expensive to, let's say, lift a road above a flood line. It is incredibly expensive to be buying out properties, to be, changing grading around those properties to be able to manage flood risk. So, and the challenge is a political one. Politicians, leaders generally are going to reflect the views of their electorate. And people, generally speaking, have a poor risk perception. We tend to think that it's not going to happen to us. The flood isn't going to happen to us. Oh, it's going to happen far away. It could be sometime in the future, or it's going to happen to some other country. And that view tends to get reflected by elected officials. And what that does is it limits the political will to invest in what we call risk mitigation, taking steps before the disaster to ensure that our infrastructure is resilient. I can give you a quick example. Let's say you live in an urban area downtown, and you're trying to invest in stormwater infrastructure or flood infrastructure to be able to handle an extreme event. Those local businesses aren't going to be thrilled that you're digging up the street in front of them to make this type of investment. It's going to be disruptive. It could be years before it's completed. That's going to hurt their flows of businesses. They would probably prefer those tax dollars go to something else, like a park or a hospital along those lines. So the politics of investing in risk mitigation aren't great. And so we tend not to see a lot of that. And that's a struggle for almost every country out there. It's difficult to do.
But not everyone, of course, has the same ability to rebuild. How do repeated floods deepen existing inequalities, pushing people further into poverty or precarious housing?
Yeah, this is a significant concern. As I mentioned, people who are in more vulnerable economic circumstances, either facing conditions of economic stability or neighborhood instability, they are impacted more disproportionately from natural disasters. It absolutely does increase inequality. These people just simply don't have the same resources to be able to manage and recover from these impacts. This is why it's important to do types of analysis where we identify just where what we call hotspots exist. Here we have a relationship between people who are particularly vulnerable and risk. And it's in those areas where we should be prioritizing defenses over others. Someone who lives in a mansion on the side of a river is going to be able to manage, some flooding, right? They're going to have access to resources. Someone who lives in a basement apartment or a basement unit, or who's a farmer, and who is, significantly impacted, is not going to be able to recover from these types of things. So we really need to be directing resources to these people through policy, targeting disaster assistance, targeting money for protection. And more broadly, where it's difficult to do. No country does this very well, frankly, whether you're an industrialized or a developing country. Frankly, we really do need to work on economic development. We really do need to get resources into people's pockets. This is what we've seen globally. The more resources people have, the better their economies are, the better they are able to withstand natural disasters. Bangladesh is a good example here, actually. They used to suffer significant casualties and fatalities from major cyclones in the 1970s and 1980s. And even though it's still developing, they've managed to improve their resilience to these types of events because people who are traditionally living along the coastlines and who are most exposed would never have a warning to something like a storm surge, now have more resources to be able to manage that risk on their own. So governments can do as much as their state capacity will allow and as much as their population is willing to vote for. But we really do. The bottom line here is that the more economic development that you have, the better you are able to withstand from a natural disaster. So if I'm a government in a developing country, I'm kind of keeping that first and foremost, as most of them are, right? We need to develop our economy. We need to develop our economy, and that way, that will spill over into improvements into disaster readiness and resilience that will help eliminate some of those concerns around inequality.
From the mountains of Pakistan to the towns of Canada, the message is clear. Flash floods are no longer rare. They are the new normal. We are increasingly seeing flash flooding across various floodplains and river streams that are known to be very mellow. Solutions exist, but they need funding, foresight, and political will. Whether it's a cloth mitigation project in Pakistan or housing strategies in Canada, experts agree no country can do this alone. Pakistan emits less than 1% of global carbon, yet it's facing some of the worst impacts. The call for climate justice getting louder. Whether you're in Hunza or Halifax, it's time to prepare, to push for the future where communities are protected, not abandoned. This has been Front Seat of Climate Change. I'm your host, Dawar Butt. See you next time.